And welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. A middle-aged man going through a divorce begins dating a woman he met online. The relationship becomes torrid, and eventually the man sends his girlfriend lewd texts and nude photographs of himself. Several years later, the two break up, and in revenge, the woman shares their private correspondence with other people. Nude pictures of the man wind up on the internet and ultimately in the media. He is ridiculed and humiliated. So who's the victim here? If you guess the 68-year-old man whose 5 grandchildren can now find naked pictures of him online, you obviously haven't been reading the Washington Post lately. The man in question is Republican Congressman Joe Barton of Texas, and according to the Washington Post, he deserves to be ashamed of his, quote, secret sex life. Keep in mind that nobody has accused Barton of abuse or even abuse of power. The relationship was consensual. If anything, it is Barton's former girlfriend who may be guilty of a crime. So-called revenge porn is illegal in many places and ought to be. And yet, for reasons never explained, the Washington Post and many other media outlets treated Barton like the heir to Harvey Weinstein, even offering anonymity to the woman who overturned his life and humiliated him. Sex abuse stories have dominated the news for the past 6 weeks, beginning with Weinstein. Predators in Hollywood, the media, and politics have been exposed, and they have been punished. And that is good news, because justice is always good news. And we'll continue to bring you updates on those stories as we get them, and we're sure we will. But going forward, we should also be careful that the noble effort to end sexual harassment does not degenerate into a witch hunt. It can happen, as the Washington Post just proved. So with that in mind, 2 things to remember. First, anonymous accusations always lead to abuses. The right to face your accuser is the cornerstone of justice and has been since ancient Rome. That's why it's enshrined in the 6th Amendment to the Constitution. It's why we ban star chambers. We don't allow people to accuse others of armed robbery or murder from behind the shield of anonymity. Why do media outlets allow it in cases of sexual harassment? If you're going to name the accused, you ought to name the accuser, assuming it's an adult. News organizations are not courts. They shouldn't take a side when guilt and innocence are in dispute. It's too easy to get it wrong, and they often do. Second, not everyone accused of a sex offense is guilty. Not every accuser is telling the truth. I learned this the hard way a number of years ago when I was accused of felony rape by a woman I'd literally never even seen. She was a certified public accountant in Indiana, an upstanding member of her community, and also apparently delusional. Her claims were grotesque, but they were highly specific. The assault, she said, took place in the back room of a restaurant in Louisville on a specific day at around 10:30 p.m. She included loads of graphic and horrifying detail. It was stomach-turning, and yet none of it was true. I spent the next 2 months trying to stay out of jail. I couldn't tell my children because I knew they'd be ashamed. I couldn't tell my employer because I knew I'd be fired immediately. I spoke only to lawyers, and I paid them a fortune. I took a polygraph exam from the former head polygrapher at the FBI. I never stopped worrying that the charges would become public and destroy my life. Everyone accused of a sex offense did something wrong. Everybody knows that, and I knew that no one would believe otherwise. This isn't a defense of sexual harassment or misbehavior, obviously. It's just a reminder that real life is complicated, more complicated than sermonizing on Twitter. Sometimes the mob is wrong. Sometimes the innocent are crushed. That's always a tragedy, no matter what the charge is. Of course, crushing the innocent may also be the point of the exercise, and we're seeing that. Last week, a feminist called Emily Linden announced on Twitter that she was, quote, not at all concerned about innocent men losing their jobs in the search for perpetrators of sexual harassment. Quote, if some innocent men's reputations have to take a hit in the process of undoing the patriarchy, that is a price I am absolutely willing to pay. Linden, not surprisingly, is a columnist at Teen Vogue. We asked her to come on tonight to talk about her views, but she refused. Instead, we're joined by Kathy Rue. Kathy, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, look, I agree with you completely. I think that if someone perpetrates a crime, legal or moral, like sexual harassment, that person ought to be held to account. So I want to be really clear.
Right.
I would never defend that.
Right. I would never defend that either.
But the whole point of the exercise is to bring about justice, to make sure that the guilty pay and the innocent go free.
Exactly.
This woman seems to be, Sara is saying, that it doesn't matter that all men are guilty by virtue of being men. That's the opposite of justice. That's collective punishment. You wouldn't be for that, would you?
No, I mean, I'm not for social injustice, but what she's trying to say that it would be microscopic compared to what women have been through. You mentioned witch hunts. There are no warlock hunts. There were never any wizard hunts. I mean, women are the ones that are often persecuted, and the mobs that you were talking about, the mobs are usually the men that are burning innocent women at the stake. So women are usually the ones that suffer much more than men, and I think that's what Emily Linden was trying to say.
That's, I mean, just for the sake of argument, I'll assume that's true. We're not teaching a history class here, but certainly people have been persecuted unfairly by mobs, that's for sure.
For centuries, women have been persecuted, yes.
Sure. And men too in some cases. But leaving the sex aside, if it was wrong then, why wouldn't you be every bit as horrified that it's going on now, or that it could potentially happen now? Why wouldn't you be horrified by what this woman wrote?
Well, she was defending it, saying that it would be wrong, but microscopic in the sense that what happens to women and women's reputations is so much worse than what would happen to a man's reputation. Women's reputations are destroyed constantly on a daily basis,
so facts don't really matter. So in other words, she's saying you should respect me when I make the case that facts don't really matter?
Well, maybe she's trying to say let's level the playing field, and men are finally feeling the pain that women have felt for a long time, for centuries.
And that's good.
Well, it's good when the sexes, when the genders are equal. And she's saying that maybe it's about time that they're equal.
So in other words, you're saying, like, I think what happened to women is wrong, so I'm going to do it to men because it feels good. Why should I take you seriously as a person if that's the case you're making?
Well, social injustice is not okay, but she's saying it happens to women all of the time. So men are finally getting a taste of it. Women are finally getting a little bit of power. So now if men are starting to feel a little bit of the pain, welcome to our club.
Huh. So how would you feel if this standard, which is horrifying, were applied to crimes like, I don't know, murder or armed robbery? Like, I don't know if you did it, but you look exactly like someone who has done it. Therefore, if you're punished for it, like, you know, at least you now know how it feels. How would you feel about that?
Well, it's rare. Women rarely accuse men of sexual harassment. It's rare that in her article she was actually saying that. In her tweets she was saying that it was rare that it actually happened.
She doesn't know anything. What do you mean rare? Look,
well, that's what she was saying.
Here's what she doesn't know. If you can present the stats, like actual social science on that, but here's what we know is that people are flawed. And most people tell the truth, but not everybody does. And that's why we have things like due process and a justice system that tries to determine objectively who is guilty and who is innocent and punishes only the first category. And she's suggesting, and a lot of other people like you are suggesting, just throw that out because everybody who makes an accusation is telling the truth when we know that's not true. Well, like, I don't want to live in the world you're describing. Do you really want to?
No, like I said, I mean, social injustice, and I don't believe in that, but I'm saying let's live in a world with everyone's reputations at stake, not just women. Not just women are called names, not just women's reputations are at stake. There aren't just witch hunts. Let's have the wizard hunts. Let's have everyone burned at the stake, if anyone's going to burn at the stake. So I think that's the philosophy.
Wouldn't it be better to treat people as individuals and assess the claims against people on an individual basis?
Absolutely, but it's not happening. It's not happening for women. No, women are the minority in this country, and we still are fighting for our equal rights. So men are still in power. You are still in power.
So you're suggesting that if women ever took power, whatever that means, I mean, I don't buy the premise of what you just said, by the way, but let's just say that if a group that felt itself to be oppressed took power, that it would oppress the group beneath it just as kind of payback is fair? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, that group is not in power. So what I'm saying is that if that group were to be in power, it would probably be a better place because we all know that women are less violent than men. They commit less murders than men, and women are just not that way. So it would actually probably be a better world if women were in charge. So
yeah. I mean, you may be right. You're not making that case very persuasively, I have to say. Why is it that in the case of these kinds of allegations, the accusers' identity is shielded? Like the basis of justice is the idea that, no, not the victim, the accuser. None of this has gone to court. The facts are not fully known. Okay, the victim and the accuser are two different things. Once you've proven you've been harmed, you're the victim. Before then, you're the accuser. Why would we jettison thousands of years of tradition, of jurisprudence, and hide the identity of the accuser? How would you feel if you were accused of something and you didn't know who was accusing you?
Right. Well, but we're seeing there are many men that are guilty right now. So
sure, yeah, there are.
Yeah, there are many men that are guilty, and you weren't one of them, but many men are guilty. So these women are speaking up, and they're having a voice now. So it's wonderful that they have a voice and they feel empowered to do so.
A voice, but no name or face. So in other words, let me just ask you again: how would you? And by the way, I think most people accused of these kinds of crimes are guilty. Okay, but what grates on my conscience is that some of them aren't.
Right.
And so I'm wondering how you would feel if I said, you know, Kathy, I've spoken to someone who accuses you of something that's career-ending, that's life-ending. It's a grave moral crime.
Right.
And I'm not going to tell you who this person is, but I'm going to tell everybody what this person accuses you of. Wouldn't you say, hey, wait a second, who is this person? I want to face my accuser. Wouldn't you think that?
I would feel like a woman has felt over the centuries, like the Scarlet Letter, like Hester Prynne that had to wear the Scarlet Letter A. I would feel like a woman the way she's been treated over the centuries. Women have been accused for years, for hundreds of years, of crimes that they didn't commit because they weren't pure enough.
But they haven't been accused anonymously, not in this country, because it's never been allowed until recently. It's never been allowed, and that would include the Puritan times, that would include the Hester Prynne era that you're referring to. People are not accused anonymously because that leads inevitably to abuses. I just want to leave on that concept. Do you understand that? What I'm saying?
Absolutely. And as I said, I don't believe that anyone should be accused falsely, but I understand her way of thinking, Emily Linden's way of thinking, and I can see what she was saying, that if men suffer in just a microscopic way compared to the way women have suffered, so be it.
Yeah. I hope you never sit on a jury, much as I like you, Kathy.
No, I like you too.
Ned Ryan is a former speechwriter at the White House. He recently wrote a piece called In Defense of Masculinity for the Journal of American Greatness, and he joins us tonight. Ned, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. Glad to be here.
How does your piece bear on the conversation, the national conversation we're having about sexual harassment?
No, I think one of the points I made in that piece, Tucker, just really addressed the fact that we're dealing with some of this toxic masculinity that Hollywood and the media created. You go back and look at the years and years of conditioning, of objectifying women, of turning them into, these objects in print and film, and normalizing abhorrent behavior. And now people are acting on the left in the media in Hollywood, they're acting self-righteous and horrified at the behavior that is the end result of the conditioning that they received for years. And Tucker, one follows the other. If people have been conditioned for years to act in a certain way, they're going to behave a certain way. And so when you see them attacking this toxic masculinity, I want to make the argument this is a culture that the left created. Some of us, and this is why I wrote that piece, have rejected that culture. We actually believe in self-discipline. We actually believe in virtue. The other great irony in all of this, Tucker, the left not only created toxic masculinity, they have enabled it. You look at the Harvey Weinsteins and the Bill Clintons and the John Conyers and the Al Frankens, again, and then they want to, as your guest just tried to make the argument, they want to pin that terrible behavior of some men on all men. And in fact say that all men are guilty of toxic masculinity when in fact we are not, and we aren't even capable of abusing those around us. And so I think this is a conversation that we have to have about what we're really discussing and who actually created the toxic masculinity. It didn't come from the right. It was something that was created by the left, and now we're seeing the end results of it.
So it seems like about 10 years ago, but it was just several months ago when the vice president said, I think to a reporter, that he does not go out to dinner with women alone. And he was accused of being some kind of snake-handling fundamentalist freak and jumped on by feminists. I wonder if they would reassess that now in light of everything we've seen in the last 6 weeks.
No, I think one of the funny things that we've seen really in the last couple of weeks, I wouldn't say funny, perhaps ironic, is that these liberal elites who sneered at us, who actually believe in a culture of practice, faith, and respect for women and respect for the institution of marriage, well, it turns out that those who are sneering at us were actually, in fact, these patriarchal, misogynistic perverts and predators. And so there are some of us that actually, many of us, that actually believe in this world that we're in, that, again, what sets us apart is self-discipline and respect and virtue and a certain behavior. It's the small decisions that make the man. And again, we refuse to be pinned with this toxic masculinity because many of us have lived our lives in a very different way. And in fact, where it's coming from is the behavior of the left and their conditioning, the culture that they have created.
Well, yeah, because I have to say, with one exception, I guess the allegations against Roy Moore would be the exception, but in almost all these other cases, these are not evangelicals who are being accused. These are self-described feminists.
That's right. That's right. No, and so I think the other thing, too, that needs to be discussed, Tucker, is this. You know, we're seeing the end result of decades and decades of conditioning in this sexual harassment, this period of what we're seeing right now. I think the other thing that concerns me a little bit, as your former guest was trying to get to, I think, I am concerned about the social experimentation that is taking place and trying to remove the manliness out of our boys. Well, and, you know, when you see some of these things that are taking place in our education system, it's of deep concern to me. Listen, I'm all for women, for all the breakthrough they've made, for girl power, all of those great things, but I think the pendulum has swung too far the other way.
Of course.
I think the boys are being left behind.
Being for women does not mean being against men, of course.
Well, see, and I think that's where the left has gone wrong.
No, I
think they've been so far. But in response to the toxic masculinity they've created, they have wanted to keep our boys suspended in this Peter Pan state and refuse to let them be men. In fact, they don't even want our boys to be boys. They want them to be girls. So I think it's something we have to push back at right now and not let it continue down this path.
Ned Ryan, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Tucker.
Taxpayers shelled out tens of thousands of dollars to settle a sex harassment claim against Congressman John Conyers of Michigan. Democrats are not racing to denounce him, weirdly. Mark Stein has thought about why. He's joining us next.
Tucker Carlson is brought to you by Alka-Seltzer.
Last week, it was reported that Democratic Congressman John Conyers had been accused of sexual misconduct by multiple women up in the Congress and reached a settlement with at least one of them. Yesterday, Conyers stepped down as the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Democrats have not been eager, though, to push him out of Congress entirely. Yesterday, instead of demanding his resignation, the House Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi, praised Conyers as, quote, an icon.
Just because someone is accused, and was it one accusation? Is it two? I think there has to be. John Conyers is an icon in our country.
Do you believe John Conyers is accused?
I don't know who they are. Do you? They have not really come forward. And that gets
so you don't know if you believe the accusations?
That's for the Ethics Committee to review.
Nancy Pelosi doesn't like anonymous accusations when they're leveled against Democrats. We notice Mark Stein is an author and columnist, and he joins us tonight. Mark, I kind of half agree with Pelosi in that, look, we don't know all the facts, and I'm willing to suspend judgment. But I'm totally baffled by her line about Conyers being an icon. That seems like a non sequitur. Like, what does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to what you've been saying earlier, Tucker, and I have grave misgivings about a lot of this because I think as a society we're short of what we used to quaintly call courtship rituals, and we risk actually making things worse by having nothing between, the rather cold world of hookups and friends with benefits, and on the other hand, Harvey Weinstein staggering around in his bathrobe. But in the case of Conyers, Nancy Pelosi, the most powerful woman in Democrat progressive politics, just gave a textbook illustration of how vulnerable women in low-level jobs are cowed into not coming forward. What does he's an icon mean? It means he's a somebody and you're a nobody. So, what does it mean when she says, I don't know who these women are? They're just girls in the typing pool, so they don't count. He's the icon.
That's right. So I'm just getting right now in my ear actually an update on this. Pelosi has just released a statement saying that she did speak to one of the accusers, apparently whose name is Melanie Sloan, and she finds the accusations, quote, disturbing. I don't have word on whether she's going to be calling for him to leave the Congress, but she does seem a little bit slow to make a judgment about Chairman Conyers. And I don't want to think it's partisan, but I can't think of another good explanation.
Well, no, because she's essentially making the same argument that Weinstein and the others made when she started saying, oh, he was very important in passing the Violence Against Women bill. Well, the old line is that bank robbers rob banks because that's where the money is. Right. Sexual predators use the cover of liberal progressive feminism because that's where the girls are. That's what Harvey Weinstein discovered. That's what
right.
Charlie Rose discovered, and that's how John Conyers seems to operate too. And in Conyers' case, it's worse, because if a guy wants to behave like a pig and abuse women in his private life, that's one thing. Conyers took it to the next level. He made you and me and all the other American taxpayers pay for it.
Well,
pay
that's exactly
for,
right.
Which is disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful.
Just to get back to something you said at the outset, which is maybe what bothers me the most, it does seem like we're moving toward a complete breakdown in the way that men and women get along, which may be the worst possible outcome. What's the solution to that?
Well, I do think that almost every other generation in human history had it easier, in that whether you're talking about accepting a dance in the 19th century or going for a chocolate malt at the soda fountain in the middle of the 20th century, we seem to have lost all that. And the danger is that we're a hypersexualized society, almost from the word go. The pop songs that 7- and 8-year-olds listen to exist in a world of hypersexualization, but then if you want to act on that, there are no longer any agreed social rituals as to how it is you're meant to pursue that. And that and re-establishing that kind of architecture is really the challenge. What Kathy was saying at the top of the show, when the women take over and we have, what did she call it, warlock hunts? I don't think warlock hunts are the answer, and I think that kind of tortured view of relations between the sexes will make a miserable world for people across
I agree. I agree with that completely. That's what you want to avoid, that kind of zero-sum thinking. Mark Stein, thank you as always for your wisdom.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
President Trump's wall along the Mexican border remains a fantasy for now, but that may not matter. Up next, we'll discuss how Trump is surrounding this country with an even more formidable virtual wall, according to the Washington Post. Stay tuned for that. Hesitation, there's a euphemism for you, has prevented very much work on the president's proposed border wall, the one that he ran on. But what if a physical wall isn't even necessary? Well, if you read the Washington Post, you already know this. A Washington Post piece says that the president is, quote, building a border wall no one can see. He's doing this, they say, by cutting refugee numbers, speeding deportations, implementing virtual vetting, and simply enforcing immigration law as it exists instead of ignoring it. And in so doing, the paper says he's creating what some are calling a virtual wall around the country. Roberto Hernandez is an immigration activist, and he joins us tonight. Roberto, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hola.
Hola. So I wanted to talk to you because you're kind of like my measure of where the left is on this. So here's what we know, at least according to the Washington Post, which I'll stipulate for the purpose of this conversation is a legitimate news organization. The president hasn't actually built the wall. All he's doing is enforcing laws that were on the books, passed with Democratic support years ago. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I think that we live in a country where there's laws.
Right.
Believe that the problem that we've had is that a lot of these, there's too many laws, and one of the things as the Latino communities, we've been saying we have to take all these different laws and create immigration reform, and every president and every Congress and every Senate in the last 20 years has failed to do that.
Well, immigration reform is a meaningless phrase. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. What you're saying is activists have demanded that people here illegally be given amnesty and then citizenship, and then some people, American citizens, disagree with that. But you, just the headline here seems to me that you think it's okay for the president to enforce existing immigration law, right?
Yeah, but when we're talking about selective immigration law enforcement, what about all the illegal Russians that have been coming here to this country?
Yeah, well, I think they're in the same category. Well, I'll talk about them right now. I think it's totally wrong to come here illegally. Why not throw every person, regardless of country of origin or ethnicity or native language, out of the country and say, apply like everybody else? Why would you be against that?
But the system that we currently have in our government doesn't have the capacity to be able to even process those applications. And that's been part of the problem.
Well, what if you just said, look, current law does not allow people to work here if they don't have a green card or the correct papers, and if they're using false federal documents, right? That's the current law, and I think you would never want to defend using fake documents on TV. So what if you just said, we're going to make sure through E-Verify that nobody can employ someone here illegally, and nobody can get welfare if they're here illegally? Then you would see and everyone mocks the phrase, but you would see self-deportation, because what would be the options? Would you be against that?
Well, but let's talk about, you talked about not hiring people, and let's begin by looking at farm workers here in California. You're from California like I am. In California, how many growers that grow grapes, tomatoes, lettuce, and all the fruits and vegetables that we grow in California hire people who are not here with documents?
Right. So you're saying that big business doesn't like it.
Yeah, of course. You know, it's interesting that now the growers are saying we need to have comprehensive reform, because if you had every farm worker in the state of California,
right, making an American wage and treated like a human being, that would be a disaster for big business. Yes, it would. Let me ask you really quickly, when you were growing up, a young radical, a liberal, did you ever think you would find yourself in a position defending big business that wants to pay people less for working outside? Did you ever think, I'm going to grow up and become that guy, a shill for business?
I knew that from a very young age that farm workers were being mistreated and abused.
Yeah, exactly.
I was part of the United Farm Workers movement with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta.
Who was radically against illegal immigration, as you know, who physically assaulted illegal immigrants.
That goal, because you don't have a system that takes care of those who take care of you, who feeds you.
That's not what Cesar Chavez says. As you know, he was totally opposed to immigration and all its sorts. Roberto, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Congress can't fix taxes or immigration. They haven't made your life better recently. I bet that's fair to say. But they do have the will to come together to approve further monitoring of you and me through our email and phone calls. We'll tell you the details next. Congress hasn't yet been able to agree on how to fix health care, or immigration, or the tax code, but they might be able to come together on at least one thing: entrenching America's surveillance state, which, by the way, is aimed at you. For the first time since Edward Snowden fled to Russia, the FISA law, which enables the collection of Americans' private communications, is up for congressional reauthorization, and Congress seems poised to approve it quickly. Should they? Alan Dershowitz is a lawyer and a professor emeritus at Harvard Law School. He's studied these questions for years, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So I think everyone agrees, certainly I think, that you want robust intelligence agencies defending you from foreign threats, which are real and are proliferating. So I think we need surveillance. I'm just concerned because the bulk of the surveillance is of American citizens, and I'm not convinced the government does enough to separate them from the potential bad guys.
Well, you're 100% right. It's one of the most complicated problems that we have, both technologically and legally. Look, terrorism doesn't recognize national boundaries or national citizenship. And so when you want to surveil conversations of bad guys who live in Yemen or Iran or Lebanon, you're inevitably going to pick up some American citizens, some innocent, some guilty.
Right.
We don't need warrants to pick up foreign conversations, but when foreign conversations are with Americans, the question is, do you need a warrant to protect the Americans? There are some potential solutions to it. One, you pick up the conversations, and if you find incriminating evidence against Americans, you go then later and get a post facto warrant that at least justifies and shows that there is now probable cause for continuing to surveil the American. Otherwise, you really have to make a decision. Is it better to err on the side of losing some terrorists or picking up some Americans? That's a very complicated and difficult question.
It is complicated. Here's a less complicated question. Should our intelligence agencies be allowed to pass on information on Americans that they pick up to the Justice Department for prosecution of domestic crimes? It's happened, and that seems to basically put the government in the role of secret police. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it should require a warrant before you turn the material over to the Justice Department. We do more than that. We also turn information against Americans over to foreign countries. If we pick up some domestic surveillance that shows that an American is planning with a non-American against some other country, we turn that information certainly over to our allies in Great Britain, in France, and in Europe. So I think a warrant has a role to play. You can't have warrants for general surveillance because you don't know what you're going to pick up. You're looking for conversation. You're looking for noise, and then the experts filter through the noise and figure out when there's relevant information.
Right.
So it's very complex to get a warrant. But once you're turning it over to the Justice Department or to other governments, a warrant requirement makes some sense.
Bottom line, I don't think you need to be crazy to be worried about this, though, do you?
You should be worried about it. Again, there are no simple-minded solutions. Some civil libertarians say it's very simple. You should have a warrant for everything. Some on the other side say you shouldn't have a warrant for anything. This is complex. It's nuanced. We need congressional input. We need to change the statute to be more protective of American citizens while not giving up what we're getting from the surveillance to stop terrorism. Hard balance to strike, but we have to do it.
It is, and I just wish there were more people speaking up for American citizens, as always. Professor, thank you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Well, there's exclusive new information tonight on an investigator who says he was targeted for raising the alarm about top-secret material that resided on Hillary Clinton's email server. A whistleblower, in other words, under attack, he says. You'll see it here next. An Obama appointee in the federal government says he was marginalized and even threatened by his superiors simply because he tried to raise the alarm about classified information that resided on Hillary Clinton's private email server. Our Catherine Herridge has that exclusive tonight.
There was personal blowback to me, to my family, to my office.
Few people know more about the Clinton emails and the fallout than Charles McCullough, the former internal watchdog for the U.S. intelligence community.
What should the American public know about those 22 top-secret Clinton emails?
I've heard people say this is overblown. I've heard people say this is much ado about nothing. Had the information been released, there would have been harm to national security.
So putting lives at risk?
Absolutely. Sources and methods, lives, operations.
Speaking exclusively to Fox, McCullough says he went to Director of National Intelligence James Clapper about a year before the presidential election. The intelligence agencies had just found their classified information in the Clinton emails.
He read through these affidavits very thoroughly, and he said this is extremely reckless. And he mentioned something about the campaign will have heartburn about that or something.
Shortly after, McCullough says his team was marginalized.
You felt you were on your own in this.
I was totally on my own, and I was told by senior officials to keep the director out of it.
You drafted this letter in January 2016.
Sure did.
In the letter, McCullough told Congress that emails beyond top secret passed through the former Secretary of State's unsecured personal server.
All of a sudden, I became a shill of the right. I was told by members of Congress, be careful, you're losing your credibility. There are people out to get you.
By February 2016, Clinton campaign emails released via WikiLeaks suggest McCullough was a target.
I think there was certainly a coordinated strategy. In fact, I not only think it, I think it very, very much so.
Based on evidence?
Yes.
Even though the FBI email investigation was far from complete, the Clinton campaign nailed down its talking points.
Was there an effort to deliberately mislead the public about the classified emails?
Absolutely. There was an effort certainly on the part of the campaign to mislead people into thinking that there was nothing to see here. Frankly, the thing that disappointed me the most was the president saying,
there's classified and then there's classified.
A lot of people in the intel community spend a lot of time keeping secrets secret. And to sort of inject that sense of confusion into people, I don't think was altogether responsible.
As Election Day approached, McCullough says the threats went further, singling him out and another senior government email investigator.
You were given a warning?
It was told that we would be the first two to be fired with her administration. That was definitely going to happen.
Is that how it's supposed to be?
No, I was, in this context, a whistleblower. I was explaining to Congress, I was doing exactly what they had expected me to do, and all of a sudden I was the enemy.
More than 2,100 classified emails passed through Clinton's personal server, and to this day, no one is accountable.
If you had done this, what would have happened to you?
I'd be sitting in Leavenworth right now.
Fox News asked a spokesman for the Clinton campaign, the office of a senior Senate Democrat, as well as a former director of national intelligence for comment, but there was no immediate response. McCullough recently retired after 26 years of government service. He told Fox News today that he's grateful now to tell his story, Tucker.
And that is the story. Catherine Harris, thank you very much for that. Richard Goodstein advised Hillary Clinton's 2008 and 2016 campaigns, and he joins us tonight. Richard, this isn't really a political story so much as it's a story about bad government, corruption. I mean, it's kind of a classic whistleblower story. Here's a guy who's a permanent government employee. He's the inspector general. He's not some low-level character. And he finds wrongdoing. He brings it to light, and his job is threatened. I mean, that seems like something you want to get to the bottom of.
So the predicate for your question, finding wrongdoing and so forth, let me tell you why I take issue with it. I will take serious issue the minute that you look into a real threat to national security, which is the president taking the Russian foreign minister and ambassador in the Oval Office, shooing out U.S. press, inviting in Russian press, and disclosing to them top secret information that did disclose where Israeli assets were dealing with Middle East agents. That's when I will take this whole thing seriously, because we know that happened.
So in other words, because you disapprove of the current president's behavior, nothing that happened before his election is.
But I'm just saying that's known. What you're talking about is something that's theoretical. And you talked about wrongdoing.
Where's the theoretical part? So we know that there were classified.
Stop. We don't. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude. James Comey testified under oath. The only time he testified under oath, he said there were three documents that were marked classified. We know at least one of which was a condolence call to the president of Malawi.
Wait, hold on. You're missing it.
Well, I'm not.
This is the inspector general, whose job it is to keep track of this, who says that there was a large amount of classified information, as distinct from documents marked classified, but information from the intelligence agencies gathered by them on her server, and that he perceived this as a threat to American national security. So I don't think there's any evidence he's some partisan axe grinder. He's a permanent federal employee. Yeah. And he is told that he's going to be fired for doing this if and when Hillary is elected. That's why we have whistleblower statutes, to protect the freedom of people like that to tell the truth, so our government doesn't become third world. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I'd love to cross-examine him and these people who said that they were in a position to say for sure that he was going to be fired. That sounds like the kind of thing that, you know, at the end of an administration you kind of are fearful of. But again, this all will be taken seriously when the 6 people in the Trump White House, from Bannon, Trebus, who use private emails and private servers, are kind of examined. Is it
really as simple as partisan tit for tat? I mean, by the way, I would say that if there's ever found to be classified material on a private server operated by a current White House employee, I'll be the first to jump on him and say, you can't do that. That's illegal, by the way. But now that you've said that the Russian government was trying to hack, you know, are the greatest threat we face, trying to hack into computers in this country, private and public, it doesn't bother you at all that there was classified information on Hillary Clinton's unsecured private server? I mean, I'm serious, actually.
No, as a literal matter, the State Department server was hacked by China and Russia. We know that. That's a fact. We actually have no evidence that Hillary Clinton's email server was hacked.
The White House servers were hacked by the Chinese military.
And
I mean, this is really common.
Shockingly, we have zero evidence that Hillary Clinton's server was hacked. I would say it's against the odds, but that's true.
Okay, but I guess that's not the question I asked. We spent, you know, in the run-up to the election, months hearing from Democrats, it's not a big deal. What are you, right-wing crazy person? But now that she's lost and gone away and off her book tour, can we just admit kind of crazy behavior to put this kind of stuff, classified intelligence, on your private unsecured server. I mean, can we admit
So
that
she
now?
didn't, quote, put anything on it, right? She was receiving emails from hundreds of
She
states.
set up the server. I mean, come on, I don't want to relitigate this, but can't you just be honest and say, that was a big, like, what was that? And by the way, if you did that and you heard the IG say it, you'd be in jail.
Yeah, I have a theory as to what it was, which traces back to, you know, how the Clintons had their private quarters kind of poured over during the 90s. But that's a different story. I have no basis for that. All I'm saying is that I don't think she was reckless.
Okay.
She certainly didn't do anything illegal. The statutes either call for intent to disclose or espionage. I don't think her worst critics think she did either of those.
Yeah. Okay. I think we'd both be in jail if we did it. But thank you.
My pleasure.
Game attempt, as always. The media very convinced all of a sudden that the word Pocahontas, actual person, is a racial slur. They're even fact-checking people who disagree with them. There is racially offensive behavior afoot, however, and we'll tell you what it is after the break. Well, today the president honored the surviving Navajo code talkers at the White House and threw in a jab at Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. He called her, as he often has before, Pocahontas, and was swiftly denounced for his insensitivity. CNN's resident genius / White House correspondent Jim Acosta put it this way, quote, White House press secretary says Pocahontas is not a racial slur. Fact check, it is. Apparently, Jim Acosta checked the official racial slur dictionary on that one. Senator Warren, of course, agreed. She described the insult also as, quote, a racial slur. Needless to say, Twitter erupted in applause. Busted! But wait, what's more offensive, jokingly using the name of a famous American Indian or spending almost a decade pretending to be an American Indian so that you can benefit from an affirmative action program designed to help actual American Indians? Elizabeth Warren did that. No one really disputes the facts of that case. Warren stole the identity of a historically oppressed group for her own gain. Talk about cultural appropriation. Good thing she didn't joke about it, though. That would have infuriated Jim Acosta. He would have been back at his racial slur dictionary. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. DVR it if you can figure out how that works. Good night from Washington. Sean Hannity's next.
All right, Tucker, thank you. Great show as always, and welcome to Hannity. We are following multiple developing stories tonight. First, two high-profile so-called champions of women.